Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Goldfish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Friday, May 11th, 2018, and this is our weekly Country Roads with Winston Shrout. And welcome, Winston. How are you today?
Well, doing pretty good. Seems like the weather's taking a turn for the good, so that's always encouraging.
Yeah, everybody's outside doing gardening. I'm getting poison ivy and
Oh boy.
trying not to spread it, and it's just a lot. It's just quite a bit. But yeah, we're outside more finally, and going to be enjoying the spring that's finally arrived on the East Coast. Finally, it took quite a
Yeah.
long time. Yeah, but lots of news though, lots of things going on, and I just wanted to screen share something really quick for our viewers. For regardless of whether you follow Q Anon or not, I have reason to believe there's an awful lot of very good things that are coming from this this messenger, should I say. And one of the things that I wanted to share was something that was posted yesterday. Of course, we have our American flag here saying Castle Lock, and I think this is referring to when you break through a castle door, the enemies inside you, then you begin to go into their territory to overthrow them. So I'm not quite sure if that's what that's referring to, but this is what I wanted to point out. It just says, fellow patriots, what you are about to learn should not only scare you, but intensify your resolve to take back control, freedom. The information that will become public will further demonstrate the criminal and corrupt pure evil, abuse of power that the Hussein administration undertook in joint efforts with domestic and foreign dignitaries, which is total treason and sedition. The snowball has begun rolling. There is no stopping it now. D5, so this is their, I believe, the fifth stage of their plan. Stay the course and trust the plan. Protective measures are in place. Remain brave. We knew this day would come. There's a link here that you might want to go and visit. It says United We Stand Worldwide. Where we go one, we go all, we fight, conspiracy no more. And I just wanted to show you this because there was we're going to be surprised. I think we're going to get ready for some news, and we have some new posts here, but I'm not going to go through all of it. But I just wanted to bring it to folks' attention today because it seems like that post in particular is talking directly to not just the anons that post on the board, but to everybody. And it was really a message to kind of, as like a warning to everybody that we're in a new phase, and it's time to it's time, I think, to reveal a lot of things that were going on. And some of what's connected to that is this whole idea of how it happened. And I'm kind of going to segue into the topic we're going to talk about today, or topic Winston's going to discuss today, and that's on corporations. Um, and what something I referred to as the corporate state, and it went way, way beyond that, which I think Q was referring to. But I don't know exactly what Winston's going to talk about, but I think it's going to help us understand the nature of corporations and how we all became intertwined with this concept. So I'll let Winston uh, take it from here.
Okay. Well, like I say, today I want to approach the subject of corporations and all those kind of things, from a point of view that most people might not have even considered. First, I want to tell kind of an interesting little story that happened with me. And that was, years ago when I was working at the Nevada test site. I was running a crew of carpenters underground. We were building all kinds of things so they could blow them up again. But anyway, one of the fellows that worked with me, we kind of had opportunity to chat. We had some things in common because when he found out I was from Kentucky, he said, well, he says, my father was from Kentucky. I said, really? I said, where was he from? He said, Covington. I said, Covington? I said, was he somehow involved? Yeah, he said, yeah, he used to deal poker, for the gambling and all that stuff in Covington until he finally run him out. Said they all moved to Chicago. I said, really? Now he said his last name was Marshall. So he said, anyway, when they left Covington, they went to Chicago. I said, well, what part of Chicago did you grow up in? He said, South Chicago.
Hmm.
And I looked at him and I said, your name's not Marshall, is it? Finally, he confessed and said, no, it's not. He said, it's Marchetti. Yeah,
Yeah,
he was Sicilian.
that's funny.
Anyway, but we had, like on that crew, we had, oh man, we had all kinds of Marines on that crew. I think 7 on the crew were, ex-Marine.
Hmm.
So we had a lot of camaraderie going on. But as a result of his revelation of his true name,
Hmm.
he told me, he flat out told me, he said, if anybody ever gives you any trouble,
Hmm.
he said, let me know. He said, I'll take care of it for you.
Friends.
I never asked for any favors.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just tell this story, to bring it into a personal level because
Hmm.
you're going to find this next little article I go into here. I'm going to show some things about corporations, that you may not have ever thought about from this point of view. And then we'll go into some of the more standard stuff. But in any event, like I say, to me, the word corporation is a 4-letter word. It's a cuss word as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
I mean, it's got 11 letters in the word, but to me, it's a 4-letter word because I've had to deal with all these things over the time, and basically no good things come from it. So I want to screen share here something, a little article. I did a little bit of research off the internet. And so I'll give you some of this information and make some comments about
Hmm.
some
Well,
things.
just the word corporate, you're talking about a body. Corporeal. It's
Uh-huh.
related to a body of making money
Okay,
off a body.
Murder Incorporated. Oh, really? You can incorporate murder? Anyway, this is an article. You can find it on the internet. I mean, some of the information on the internet, Wikipedia, or what do you call it? Yeah, Wikipedia or something like that. Some of which is erroneous, as I'm going to point out as we go along a little bit here, because I do have personal experiences with some of these things. Anyway, talking about here back in the 30s and 40s, there was organized crime groups, and they became known as Murder Incorporated. Anyway, they were acting as the enforcement arm of the Italian American mafia and the Jewish mob, connected organized crime groups in New York and elsewhere. The group was largely composed of Italian American and Jewish gangsters from Brooklyn, blah, 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 originally headed up by this Louis Lepke, Buchalter, whatever, and later by Albert Anastasia. Murder Incorporated was believed to be responsible for between 400 and 1,000 contract killings until the group was exposed in the early 1940s by former group member Abe Reles. In the trials that followed, many members were convicted and executed, and Abe himself died after suspiciously falling from a window. Anyway, one of the main prosecutors in that whole thing was Thomas Dewey. We have him in our political history and so forth and so on. And also, we became more aware of this during the early 70s when this Joseph Valachi came out with the Valachi papers. Maybe you may not be old enough to remember that. I do. Anyway, it was an exposure of the organization of crime in America. Anyway, the article goes on a little bit further. Bugsy and the Meyer Mob, the Jewish American street gang in Manhattan, and so forth. It was formed and headed by mobsters Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky during their teenage years, shortly after the start of Prohibition. I think there's been a few popular movies recently.
The Gangs of New York with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Well, not Gangs of New York, but some of the others.
That one.
Yeah, where they got the Bugsy Siegel, Meyer Lansky, and all that bunch. Kind of dramatize it, and showing how they organized. They incorporated. Anyway, during the days of Prohibition, murder incorporation was established after the formation of the Commission of the National Crime Syndicate, to which it ultimately answered. National Crime Syndicate. And then Murder Incorporated operated under that. It was largely headed by my boss, this Buckalter guy, and the Mangiano family under boss, who was Albert Anastasia, but also had members from Buckalter's labor slugging gang. Then it got all these named Three-Fingered Brown. They all want to have these cool nicknames, you know.
Yeah.
Three-Finger Louie and all that kind of thing. Anyway, it goes on, tells a little bit about it, about how they operated and so forth. 32 Crime Syndicate. He got shot for it. But what is showing here is how that the criminal element organized in a corporate function. They had board of directors. I mean, they simply duplicated. Now, anybody that knows the history of Las Vegas, you know, knows this, because back in the early days of Las Vegas, you know, it was the mob that ran Las Vegas, and then what did they do? They incorporated. Now Las Vegas is run by corporations, but who owns the corporations? The same mobsters.
Right.
So they've used corporations then to put a pretty picture, if I can use that word, because this next individual we're going to talk about here, Mo Dalitz, Morris Barney Dalitz, born in 1899, was an American gangster, a businessman, a casino owner, and a philanthropist.
Wow.
You would think some of those would be mutually exclusive, but apparently
exactly.
not. Anyway, so Mo was one of the major figures who shaped Las Vegas in the 20th century. He's often referred to as Mr. Las Vegas. It was well known around town that if Mo Dalitz was involved in any casino, there was a scam going on. Everybody, I knew that. And one of the, in my younger days, I used to be a blackjack counter. And so one night late, I just wandered into one of the casinos. I won't name which one. But anyway, it was under the control of Mo Dalitz. And so anyway, I just happened to wander in. And I was looking for a blackjack, table. And the place was kind of dead, but there was one guy sitting at a blackjack table, and he had stacks of $100 chips in front of him. And I recognized the guy. I'd seen him around town. He was just a low-level poker player most of the time. You know, I think, what the world is this guy doing with stacks and stacks of $100 chips in front of him? And it dawned on me, we got a scam going on here. So I sat right down at that table and played for all I was worth until I figured it's probably time to leave. But that's what they were doing. The dealer was pushing money at this guy. Now, this guy was a shill. So I don't know how many thousands of dollars he had sitting in front of him as far as casino chips and stuff, but I knew they weren't his. He'd get a cut for his trouble and stuff, but it was an obvious scam going on.
Wow.
And I sat down and got all I could get before I thought maybe it's time to leave. Anyway, Dalitz, born in Boston to a Jewish family. He grew up in Michigan. And that might not be true. Anyway, he worked on his family laundry business, began his career in bootlegging like most of them did.
Family laundry business? You mean money laundering?
And other things. Anyway, when he was questioned, he actually admitted under oath that he had been involved in bootlegging and illegal gambling and all that kind of stuff, during the Estes Kefauver committee hearings, with Congress and stuff. And his excuse was, if people wouldn't have drunk it, I wouldn't have bootlegged it. Yeah, the Prohibition actually promoted criminality. And that's one of the reasons why they had to get rid of it, because the
Yeah.
criminals were getting rich because liquor was illegal. They had to stop that. I
Oh.
mean, they had to change that amendment because crime was going crazy.
Hmm.
Because, like Mo says, if people wouldn't have drunk it, I wouldn't have bootlegged it.
There you have it.
Yeah, and so they had to get rid of that prohibition in a big hurry because of the amount of money that was being made by the mob. I mean, it's just like the same thing with this marijuana and all this kind of junk.
Hmm.
I mean, we've seen it in our own time. We've seen the same thing.
Hmm.
Anyway, actually, Mo did, serve our country during World War II. He listed in the Army and rose from a private all the way to a first lieutenant.
Hmm.
So apparently, he did have skills in military life and stuff, which is good. Anyway, talks about his career and says his investments in Vegas began in the 40s with the Desert Inn. I fixed to tell you some stories about that
Hmm.
because I do have some direct involvement with some of that. Anyway, he talks about taking over the Desert Inn from Wilbur Clark.
Hmm.
Uh, anyway, he goes into a little bit. You can read this on the internet. This is nothing. Anyway, so this Clark, who had gone bankrupt on the Desert Inn, and when Mo came in and took it over, then he kept Clark on as his front man. But who was the guy behind the scenes? It was Mo Dalis. Yeah. Anyway, he owned it. He owned the Desert Inn until '67 when Howard Hughes
Hmm.
bought it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I could sit here and tell you Howard Hughes stories for about 2 hours. I mean, because I know some of that. I've been involved with some of those people. I mean, I've sat in some of their homes.
Oh.
I mean, I was in the home of this guy. Hell, he's probably about 80 years old at that time.
Hmm.
But he had been one of the front men for Howard Hughes on a lot of the things, like the McCarran Airport. That was Howard Hughes's.
Hmm.
I mean, aside from the casinos and junk, the international airport that people fly into in Las Vegas called McCarran Airport, it belonged to Howard Hughes. And this fella I used to go and visit, this old fella, he was Hughes' front man on that airport.
Hmm.
So, you see all this stuff,
It's all connected, right? It's funny
it's
what
all,
you find out when you really look into it and what you
oh
see
my.
is behind it.
But
Hmm.
then it gets into his humanitarian. He says with Allard Rowan and Irwin Molaski and Merv Adelson, he founded Paradise Development, a real estate development company in the 50s.
Hmm.
Together, they founded the Sunrise Hospital, Boulevard Mall, and Las Vegas Country Club. Those are all still there and in operation.
Hmm.
So he did do humanitarian things
Hmm.
in that respect. And then the convention center in '83, that was his. That was Mo's. Mo did that. Anyway, reports on his death said at 2 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, '89, Mo Dalis died. He had been seriously ill since 1986. Death was attributed to congestive heart failure, chronic hypertension, and kidney failure.
Probably drank a lot, huh? A little bit.
No, no, this is a false report.
Oh.
Mo didn't die from those causes. Mo died from lead poisoning.
Oh, he was poisoned.
Yeah. What had happened was Mo and a couple of his bodyguards had gone out to one of the building sites that he was putting up a building. It was an ambush. They killed both of the bodyguards, and I think Mo got either 4 or 6 shots. He died from lead poisoning.
Oh, he was shot. Winston. I wouldn't.
So for
Okay,
the
okay.
public for the public face,
Yeah.
they're saying Mo died from a congestive heart failure. They might have hit him in the heart. I don't know, but Mo died from lead poisoning. He didn't die from disease. No, he died right on the scene. They might have hauled him to the hospital. I don't know. But
Yeah, but it's kind of funny though, because when you look at it, it says death was attributed to
I know.
congestive heart failure. It's like, are they sure? Pick one. Anyone, just pick one.
Yeah,
You know what I
they
mean?
might have got him in the heart. They might have got him in the kidneys. But but it's lead poisoning that did
I mean, isn't it enough to just say he died from congestive heart failure? Do you have to go onto the list of
it.
things that killed him? It's like, that's why it's kind of funny to look at it because it seems like, are you sure he died of one of these things or all three
Well,
of them?
Mo Dalis was well known in Las Vegas. You know, he was considered Mr. Las Vegas, very popular. He was at all the functions. Like I say, he did the humanitarian stuff. Sunrise Hospital is still there, you know, and Boulevard. All those things are still there,
Mm,
and those are things that he did create.
mhm.
And so to put uh, a good slant on what happened to Mo, they didn't want to say he got shot down on the
Right,
strip
right.
because that's bad publicity for the other good things
Yeah.
that he was involved in. But like I say, he seemed to be a very capable and talented individual. Like I say, he rose all the way from private to lieutenant. He got battlefield commission, for crying out loud.
Mm,
He must have been a brave soldier.
mm. There you
But
go.
aside from that, uh, the history that you have here, the to have on the internet, not exactly accurate.
Right.
Actually, Mo grew up for the most part in Cleveland because he was running with what was called the Purple Gang out of
Mm,
Cleveland, and they had run. I mean, they were a very, very powerful Jewish gang.
mm,
And it's called the Purple Gang, and then they moved down into Havana, and they were running casinos down in Havana until Castro got after them and run them out. And so when he run them out, where'd they go? Las Vegas. Of course, they certainly had concerns going on in Las Vegas already. But when Castro run them out of there, then they headed for moved all their operations to Vegas and stuff. And I knew one of those. Now he wasn't old enough, but his father was working with Mo and that bunch down there in Havana. And when Castro came in, this individual who I was acquainted with, his mother left, and she left her husband in Havana, went to Las Vegas, remarried one of the casino owners in Vegas, and then I knew him because there was a certain involvement. Like I've told my stories about living out in the desert and stuff. Well,
right.
the place we were living at, across the wash, there was a big ranch over there. It was called the D.I. Ranch. D.I. Desert Inn.
Mm,
It was owned by Mo Dalitz. The whole ranch was owned by Mo Dalitz. The reason he had it, I think, because it's just across the Utah border, out in the middle of nowhere. They had an airstrip out there. So if they had some business to take care of,
mhm.
they bring their businessmen over to the Utah side out of the jurisdiction of Nevada. And they had a big house down there, and in the basement, they had the typical, chains and hooks and all that kind of stuff. Because it's common knowledge down in that part of the country, if you're out walking through the desert and you see a green spot that shouldn't be there, there's a body planted there.
Jeez.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this went on for a long time, and we had some
Mm,
involvement with that. And then finally, you see, Mo was using the front man for that. The guy that actually was the front man was a legitimate rancher, and he lived down Bunkerville, down on the Nevada side. But he was the front man, and so I don't think Mo was all that interested in ranching, obviously. But they were operating a valid ranch with an airstrip and a torture chamber and a backhoe.
mhm. Jeez. Mm,
So that kind of stuff went on, and everybody in that country knows about that. I mean, it's no great big secret. But everybody know you didn't mess with any of Mo's stuff. Because you went over there on his ranch and caused any problems, you're gonna have to deal with Mo Dalitz. And that's the sum total of it.
yeah, it just seems like they're more civilized about it these days, where we actually have, hospitals that put you on, chemotherapy
Uh,
drips
well,
instead of hooks, so you actually die much slower than you used to, I think.
it could
And then,
be.
you know,
But like I said, we had quite a bit of interchange, with the actual ranch. Actually, one of my boys went over and put in, some major irrigation lines for him and stuff. So, there was a certain, I mean, as far as ranch life,
Mm-hmm.
you know, life in the desert goes, there was a certain amount of interchange because, they at least they had to present a respectable front.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the nearest law enforcement in Utah was something like 25 miles away in St. George.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were pretty isolated. They could carry on whatever they wanted to do. And like I say, just a rock's throw to the Nevada border, just a rock's throw. So that's what they did. And so, I mean, aside from being Mr. Las Vegas, being a humanitarian and all that kind of stuff, he was a murderer.
Mm-hmm.
He had a blatant murderer and a torturer. And we don't like that kind of people. That's not good for us. Now, why did I bring all this crazy stuff up?
Yeah, I definitely, you were right, Winston. Not what I would expect.
Yeah, because you had said that, that a lot of people might be interested in the concept of corporations and how they affect us and all these kind of things. Well, the criminals early on took the message. Now we're going to go into the history of corporations here in just a minute and how it applies. But anyway, early on, those who wanted to carry on criminal enterprises saw the value of incorporating and organizing. And they took full advantage of it. And so once they started to get into the corporate world, especially through the casino concept, now they found out how to launder their drug money. They found out how to launder all these illegal funds was through the corporate structure. And so they've carried on horrendous crimes, legitimized it in the standard way that IBM or anybody else does it. See, they learned. That's why I say, even though there's, I think, 11 letters in the word corporation, to me, it's a 4-letter word. It's just an open invitation for criminal activity. Now, when you go back again to the Kennedy days with the Bay of Pigs and all those kind of stuff, and what happened, Sam Giancana gets in the middle of all that, a bad psychopath. And he flat out said, he was interviewed, he flat out said, somebody asked him about the mob's association with the CIA. He said, they're all the same people. That's what he said. He said, there's no difference between the mob and the CIA. He said, they're all the same people. And so for crying out loud, folks, wake up and smell the coffee or something, because this is how they operate. Now, shouldn't that kind of put a little hitch in your get along or in your thought process when you think about, well, everybody says, well, we're going to go out and do something over here. We're going to go and incorporate. I don't, I don't know. I don't know if that's such a good idea. Now, for all those, rah, rah, hoorah people who are just cheering and screaming, what did Trump just do with the latest tax bill? You're on mute.
Oh, you're right. I am on mute. Sorry about that.
What
Uh,
what 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 did Trump just do with the
well, he
latest
dissolved
tax
the
bill?
corporation.
He did what?
He dissolved the U.S.
No,
corporation.
no. I'm talking about the tax bill. He lowered the taxes for corporations.
Yes, he did. Well, you would expect that.
Okay, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. You
Well,
know,
he used to own casinos. Let's go back to the beginning of the story.
okay, all right. But what I'm trying to point out is that we have a virus, an infection in our commercial community, and the name of the virus is corporation. Now we're going to go into some of this a little bit more detail here presently. But when you we've spoken of this in the past, and that is the concept of fascism. Now, fascism is loosely defined as rule by corporation. In other words, the government either fosters or forms corporations to govern. Now, haven't we seen this in our own country?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, what has been the biggest organization in our country which has oppressed the people more than any other?
The courts.
Nope, the IRS.
Okay, the IRS. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, they're up there. There's a whole
and
bunch to choose from.
what is the IRS? Is the IRS a government corporate agency? The answer
No,
is
it's
no,
not.
it's not.
Right.
It's not. What is it? It's a corporation. And the holding company that holds the IRS is called Northern Trust Corporation. It's a holding company. It holds the IRS, it holds the bar associations, and quite a few of the banks. But again, we're talking about rule by corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only do we have the mafia or the mobsters who are taking advantage of corporate benefits,
Right.
but now we have some of these others that are doing the exact same thing. That's why I say corporation to me is a 4-letter word.
Mm.
I mean, you might just well say damn or hell.
Well, it makes sense because this is what we're seeing today, and it is all fascism. It is all ruled by corporation, and um, we are we saw that go to an extreme degree under President Obama,
Mm-hmm.
and what they were trying to do, what that Q post was referring to today. It's
Yeah.
exactly why I wanted to read that, because it was timely, as so many of your messages and reports are,
Yeah.
with
Well, let's
where
go
world events.
to an article. I didn't write it, but this one here, points of fascism.
Mm.
Now, when you start to talk about fascism, these are the elements that you'll find. Number one, powerful and continuing nationalism.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Fascist regimes tend to make constant use of patriotic mottos, slogans, symbols, songs, and other paraphernalia.
Mm.
Flags are seen everywhere,
Right.
as are flag symbols on clothing and in public displays.
Right.
Go back and watch some of the old movies,
Right.
of Nazi Germany and all that kind of stuff, and
Right.
then
It's everywhere.
compare it to our parades. You see the same
Right.
thing.
Yeah, and we see it also with the communist countries too, to an extreme degree there as
Oh
well,
yeah, oh yeah.
which is also.
Number two, disdain for the recognition of human rights. Because of fear of enemies and the need for security, the people in fascist regimes are persuaded that human rights can be ignored in certain cases because of need. The people tend to look the other way or even approve of torture, waterboarding,
Yeah.
summary executions, assassinations, long incarceration of prisoners, and etc.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the elements of typical fascism.
Right.
Number three, identification of enemies or scapegoats as a unifying cause. Now, this concept here comes right straight out of Tavistock. I'll put it that way.
Mm.
Anyway, the people are rallied into a unifying patriotic frenzy over the need to eliminate a perceived common threat or foe, racial, ethnic, or religious minorities, liberals, communists, socialists, terrorists, or whatever. I think we could have the Fets comment on this quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. This is.
Okay.
That's what
Item
for.
number 4,
Yeah.
supremacy of the military. Even when there are widespread domestic problems, the military is given a disproportionate amount of government funding. Didn't we just have a great big bunch of money that was allocated for the
Yeah,
military?
exactly. That's exactly what just happened, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So,
I guess we must really be in danger if the military has to have all that money.
well,
Okay.
if we're creating and forming proxy armies to fight other countries' civil wars, yeah,
Yeah, and the last sentence there says soldiers and military service are glamorized.
right. Mm-mm.
Now, I'm not saying that
Yeah.
everything that we do in some respects to these things is an indication of fascism.
Uh-huh.
But in fascism,
Controlled
these
mass.
are some of the elements that become prominent. I mean,
Controlled.
I have no disrespect for people in the military. I was in the military.
Yeah.
I have no respect for that. But when we start to glamorize, be all that you can be. I
Mm,
mean, I don't know how much of the Army's budget is in advertising,
mm.
but they advertise all over the place because, again, the draft is no longer in effect.
Well,
So they have to encourage people to join the military, and so they have to entice them. So they spend, large sums of money on advertising.
yeah.
And so I'm just pointing out.
Yeah.
I'm not pointing fingers at people, but I'm pointing out some of the concepts
Right.
that associate themselves with fascism. That's what I'm
Sad,
doing.
but sadly, we can. Sadly, I mean the controlled mass media. So, we are definitely at this. We are not only at the doorstep; we're beyond the doorstep of fascism, and it is. Done so incrementally that people don't notice, and it is done with the intent to program people. I mean, it is a social engineering, if
Yeah,
you will. And so we are here. Sadly, we definitely are here. And the problem is that people will, think that it's good for them, and that's the sad part about humans, is that they really just don't get it. Sometimes they really
yeah.
don't get it when people are hurting them like sheep. They don't believe.
Okay.
So let's go ahead.
Item number 5,
Yeah.
rampant sexism.
Mm,
The governments of fascist nations tend to be almost exclusively male dominated.
yeah.
Under fascist regimes, traditional gender roles are made more rigid. Opposition to abortion is high, as is homophobia and anti-gay legislation in national policy. But we have made some inroads into this. But like I say, when I was in the Marine Corps in the early '70s,
Mhm.
if you're gay, you for damn sure better not join the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
I ain't kidding you. I mean that was almost like a death sentence. You would never do that. Now it's changed in more recent times. I mean, they had the policy, don't ask, don't tell kind of thing, and now it's even become a lot more open than it had in times past. But when I was in the Marine Corps in the early '70s, if you were gay, for God's sake, don't join the Marines. It would not end up good for you, put it that way. Anyway, next one here, item 6, control mass media. Sometimes the media is directly controlled by the government, but in other cases, the media is indirectly controlled by government regulation or sympathetic media spokespeople and executive. Censorship, especially in wartime, is very common.
I'm just going down,
I
checking
don't,
off
I
the
don't think
list here, Winston. It's,
yeah, we don't even need to comment on that one. Pardon me, I get all excited here and then I start coughing. I'll have to slow down a little bit. Item number 7, obsession
Mm,
with national security. Fear is used as a motivational tool by the government over the masses. Well,
mhm.
that's pretty obvious. Okay, religion and government are intertwined.
Hmm.
Governments in fascist nations tend to use the most common religion in the nation as a tool to manipulate public opinion. Oh, are we going to have a prayer meeting with Trump tomorrow?
Mm.
Religious rhetoric and terminology is common from government leaders, even when the major tenets of the religion are diametrically opposed to the government's policies or actions. In this respect, are you attending a church that's a 501c3
Right.
that's incorporated for tax purposes?
Mm. Honey, yeah, exactly. It's time taxes start, churches start paying their fair share.
If they incorporate, they have to. See, I missed some while ago.
Mm,
Somebody had contacted me. I think there was a church in Indiana that was being attacked
mm,
uh, by the IRS because this church had managed to accumulate, some property,
mm,
buildings and stuff. I think they had, their value might have been somewhere
mm,
around $2 or $3 million,
mm,
and they were 501c3. And so, some of the different ones in the community, that I working and stuff had asked, what can be done. Well, first thing you need to do is get away from that 501c3. That's an IRS church controlled by the IRS.
mm,
As a matter of fact, if you're involved in a 501c3
mm.
and some member of your congregation has a tax liability, the IRS can come in and collect that liability from any member, not just the one who has the liability. And they have done that. Anyway, let's not get off on that.
Mm,
Uh, and so in fascism, corporate power is protected, obviously. The industrial and business aristocracy of a fascist nation often are the ones who put the government leaders into power, creating a mutually beneficial business government relationship and power elite. What was Trump's occupation before he got into politics?
yeah. Uh, the developing.
Okay, I'm just pointing things. I'm not
I know.
criticizing. I'm
I
just
know.
pointing things out.
Well, I didn't say he was a perfect person.
Yeah, but he was not a professional politician,
No.
but he was a professional businessman, and that's the reason why the military put him in there.
Right.
Because again, the high military people have no business experience, and so in order to unwind the United States Incorporated, they
Mm,
brought in a businessman who was capable of doing that.
exactly.
Politicians couldn't do it. Most
Right.
politicians are attorneys, so they don't know how to do it either. Took a businessman,
Mm-hmm.
so that's why they put him in there. Uh, Again, in fascism, labor power is suppressed because the organized power of labor is the only real threat to fascist government. Labor unions are either eliminated entirely or severely suppressed. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
was in the carpenters union. I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
I saw how the politics, tried to influence the labor unions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and back east, my God,
Exactly.
I would not become involved in any union on the East Coast. Luckily, this one was out of Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the guys from back east did migrate. I've worked with some of them,
Mm-hmm.
out of the Las Vegas Union, and they were telling me about conditions in on the East Coast,
Mm.
and scary, scary stuff. I mean, we still don't know where Jimmy Hoffa is buried at now, do we?
Well, the last rumor was in the base of the George Washington Bridge,
Yeah, someplace
the
there. Who
port.
cares?
I
He's
know.
gone. He's gone. Thank God for that. But anyway, we see all these things
Mm,
now. During the days, when the communists were trying to make inroads into the United States, they thought that they would be able to go to the labor unions
mm,
because in their minds they thought that the people in the labor unions were somehow suppressed.
mm,
And when the communists tried to influence the labor unions, they told them get lost. We
mm,
got a good thing going. We don't need any of your BS. So the communists failed completely with the labor unions.
mm,
But who did succeed with the labor unions?
The mob.
Yeah,
Hmm.
the corporations.
And in comes Kennedy's.
There you go. Look, I mean, I'm commenting on some of this stuff tongue in cheek, but
Mm,
it's real.
yeah.
But it's real. Like I say, I can sit down and tell you stories about the Howard Hughes stuff for
Mm,
2 hours,
mm.
make your hair stand on end.
Next time.
And I don't think so.
Yeah, right.
Uh, number 11, disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Fascist nations tend to promote and tolerate open hostility to higher education and academia. It is not uncommon for professors and other academics to be censored or even arrested. Free expression in the arts is openly attacked, and governments often refuse to fund the arts.
That's just what
Uh,
happened.
yeah,
Actually, sadly, yeah, Trump, announced he was reducing the, um, uh, I guess in the budget for the expense for the arts, like public broadcasting system. But I think that's more media related, though. It's more
it could be, but under
fake news.
under a fascist regime, they completely take over the educational system as they have in our country here.
Right. Exactly.
Public schools,
Mm-hmm.
or what
Absolutely.
the old people used to call free schools. The old timers were not in favor of free schools.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to pay for the kids' education. And see, like I say, I've studied a lot about Mormon history in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
So when the pioneers finally got settled in Utah and stuff, the question of education came up, and there was a faction that wanted to promote free schools. And Brigham Young,
Mm-hmm.
a noted Mason,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, Brigham Young was totally opposed to it. He
Mm-hmm.
said, no. He said, we're not going to have free schools. But he said, if there's any student who wants an education and it can't afford it, I'll pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's the proper position to take.
Exactly.
So he was dead against free schools because he knew the implications of it. He said, no, we're going to have, private or pay schools, but any student who can't afford the price, I'll pay for it.
Mm.
See what I mean?
Yep.
So I think that was the very best approach. Anyway, uh, obsession with crime and punishment.
Mm.
Police are given almost limitless power to enforce laws. How many stories do we hear every day of this?
No.
And then the rampant cronyism.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
and then
Mm.
fraudulent elections.
Have him all the time. There's going to be
Like,
major election
like I
reform
said,
coming up.
it's well known that the last elected president we have was John F. Kennedy.
Hmm.
All the rest of them have been selected, including Trump.
Yep.
Well, those are some of the foibles that you run into when you start to consider uh, fascism and some of the elements, of that.
Yep.
The sun's making funny spots on my face.
Oh yeah, it's at that time of morning again.
Hold on for a
Well,
minute. Let me see if I can get
sure.
that shade just a little bit better.
Hmm.
It's not.
We know that. We know that. Go ahead. I'm going to keep talking. Um, Aaron
Okay.
Russo. Aaron Russo, who was the director, producer of America: Freedom to Fascism, suddenly became ill um, with some kind of incurable cancer and died. But he did make that movie called America: Freedom to Fascism, and he was basically it was like a documentary in many ways. It was a documentary about how the IRS is not, an actual government agency, and that it's uh, that you don't actually there's no law to force you to pay taxes. It's supposed to be voluntary, and so you might know of that movie. Yeah, do you know that movie?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah. Oh, I just lost you. Okay, hang on one second. exactly. So, we are in fascism, but a lot of people don't recognize it.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. Maybe I can just scoot over a little bit. That's
Yeah,
let me do this.
yeah. Last time you just sat a little closer and it worked. Yeah, there you go. Works good.
Okay.
As long as it doesn't bother you, we're good on this
Well,
side.
it don't bother me so much, but people have commented on some of the things, they see, all our productions and stuff. So we
Right.
try to get as good a production as we can. All
Okay.
right. Now I want to launch into another article
Mhm.
that I collected over time, added a few things to it myself. But I want to show you something that's going to shock you. And I'll tell you
Well,
the story behind it.
we're ready.
Uh, huh? Yeah, I haven't shocked you enough already. Darn
No,
it.
no.
Let me keep.
Q's going to shock us too. So any
Yeah,
day we're going to start
yeah.
getting. So get ready to be shocked, people.
Let me try
Got here.
to shock you just a little bit more.
Mm, hmm.
Yeah, this original article, that I've added a few things to, was called the Nazi Hydra in America, which has to do with the history of corporations. And there's a lot of good information in this article, and I'll send it to you so that you can share it.
Okay.
People might want to look at it, but there's one thing I want to shock you with right off the top is this photograph right here. Do you know what this photograph is of?
Sadly, yes.
It's a House of
Yes.
Representatives.
All right.
Now I want you to focus in on these two emblems here on the side. Do you recognize those?
It's a little hard to tell what they are, but it looks like the snake around.
No, it's not a snake.
It's hard to tell. It's a little bit grainy. Maybe you can.
How about that? All right.
Dragon. It's a dragon or a snake
No,
or something.
no. These are
I
the
can't.
symbol of fascism.
Oh, okay, because I couldn't see it that good.
It's a bundle of sticks with a handle on the bottom and an axe head in the top.
Really? Because you really can't see that. Okay.
Well, you
No, that's
can.
terrible. Ugh, that is
It's on
shocking.
either side of the war flag behind the podium in the House of Representatives.
Hmm.
Now, let's just pause silently for about 5 seconds here to consider this. Starting now.
Okay.
After my moment of silence there, the only thing I can say is basically, oh hell.
That's right. Right. Hiding in plain sight, as they always say, Winston.
Yes, it is. See, one time, years ago, when some of the kids were little, I decided, go back east. My mother lived in Kentucky, so we were going to go back east to see her. And I thought, well, let's just take a trip on over to D.C. so the kids can have an opportunity to see the nation's capital and stuff. So we were in the Congress building, and they were having tours going through and whatnot. So we kind of fell in behind this one tour, and so we went in. We was in the gallery right here in this very room,
Right.
House of Representatives, and so the tour guide, he was telling all about it, about the history of it and the different things. And, then he made the mistake of asking anybody got any questions. So, so I raised my hand and was recognized. I said, what's those two things out there behind the podium? That looks like some kind of a bundle of sticks with an axe head in it. I said, what's that? He said, continuing on.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
either he didn't know or he didn't want to say.
Yeah. You know.
But anyway,
Jeez.
yeah, when pressed, they're not going to tell you.
Hmm.
All right. Well, let's get along here with this a little bit. And oops, sorry. Let's take a look at some of the information that's a part of this original article.
Hmm.
And then we get down into some real good history about how corporations have come about. Anyway, it says by 1990, 10 corporations accounted for 22% of all profits in the United States. Only 400 corporations controlled 80% of all capitalist assets in the non-socialist world. 49 American banks hold controlling interest in 500 large corporations, and 10 corporations own the 3 largest television networks and 62 networks. Now, that's in 1990, 28 years ago.
Mm.
I think the statistics would have significantly changed were he to do that same analysis today. Matter of fact, I have seen some other, research that others have done, and so these numbers here are pretty low.
Mm.
Because it keeps becoming more and more and more centralized. See?
Mm-hmm.
So this should be readily apparent that fascism was the top-down revolution of the elite. It was the large industrialists that brought Hitler to power in a backroom deal, almost the exact parallel to the candidacy of George W. Bush in 2000. Now, he's talking about the Hitler power, but you can go right back to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Same exact. Who do you think funded Lenin? The New York capitalist banks.
Right. The Rothschilds.
Anyway, it says just like history visited the alleged father. He says alleged because probably the guy we call George Bush Sr. was actually somebody else's kid. Put it that way. Anyway, the alleged father was Preston Bush, who was prosecuted for trading with the enemy in connection with IG Farber Corporation during the buildup of Hitler's regime. If that process had worked in the 1930s, there was reason to believe that the same process would work in 2000, and it did.
Right.
Who was elected in 2000?
Bush.
George Bush Jr.
Bush, yeah. I mean, elected. He stole the election. You mean who stole the election in 2000?
That's what I'm trying to tell you. We have not had an elected president since John F. Kennedy.
Exactly.
It says at the beginning of World War II, the U.S. was wholly unprepared for military quest. They had to gear up rapidly. Many of the large manufacturers were actually involved in the Nazi war machine. With the entrance of the U.S. into the war, supplies and equipment to Germany had to stop. Theoretically, the same enthusiasm and production given to the Germans would have rapidly equipped the U.S. and was enforceable under the Trading with the Enemy Act. The only problem was that the large industrialists used that need to their own advantage. They extorted the U.S. government. What happened was that even though the factories were just as production for the U.S. as they had been for the Nazis, the industrialists who were fascists at heart, and that's why I have never owned and would never buy a Ford. People say, Winston, why are you a Chevy kind of guy? I say, well, I would never own a Ford for this very reason we're talking about here, because of what Ford did for the Nazis. And I had, relatives and stuff that fought in World War II. Those kind of things, don't go away, at least in my mind. Anyway, so these industrialists halted, delayed, slowed down until they could extort higher prices for the goods produced for the U.S. that they had produced for the Nazis. This was just not an instance of price gouging, but an outright treason against the United States and the soldiers and sailors who went up against the Nazi war machine, ill-equipped to match the military power purchased by the Nazis at the demise of American soldiers. None of these industrialists were ever charged and prosecuted for these war crimes, even to this day. Now, as we go further in this article right here, you're going to see how that through corporations that they were able to do this. Because again, a corporation is a straw man. It's a straw man. And again, it operates under limited liability. And so these industrialists use the corporate concepts to gouge or to extort the United States government, when they should have pitched in with everybody else in the war effort, but they didn't. They extorted, and as a result of it, many of our families lost husbands, sons, all these kind of things in that war effort that may have not lost their life as these industrialists produced what was needed to prosecute that war. That's what I'm saying. I'll never buy a Ford. Never
Well,
will.
according to David Icke, the war was just meant for the elites to profit from. They didn't care who was killed.
Well, of course.
They only did it they only did it for exploitation. So, and we continue to allow this. So we need to stop allowing that. Yeah.
Anyway, fascism might be generally defined as rule or government by corporations. The term fascismo is derived from the Italian word fascio, which means bundle or group. Like that bundle of sticks I was just showing a minute ago. A bundle or group, and from the Latin word fasces, the bundle of sticks used symbolically for the power through unity. The fasces, which consisted of a bundle of rods that were tied together around an axe, were an ancient Roman symbol of the authority of the civil magistrate. They were carried by the lictors and could be used for corporal and capital punishment at the command of the civil magistrate in Rome. So that's where that symbol came from, and people are interested.
Right. And
then again, I got this picture. I'll send you this article.
Yeah.
It's one I put together some years ago.
Okay.
Anyway, so again, back in the background on either side of the American war flag, you see these fasces bundles with the axe head in them, and that's where it all came from. Okay, so a brief look at past state constitutions, court cases will provide the reader with a background in understanding how corporations were kept in check in the 1800s. It wasn't until after the Civil War that corporations became so prominent and powerful. In the past, corporate laws held corporations in check until the latter part of the 1800s with the rise of the silver and railroad barons. See, the railroads played such a huge part in the direction that we've gone with government, because as he'll point it out here, so I'll just keep reading. In fact, corporate law evolved along with the emergence of a wealthy elite class. The Transcontinental Railroad, as an example, was a huge undertaking, and so the corporations who were to construct these railroads enlisted the help of the U.S. government in the enterprise. The corporations had to cross state borders with the rail lines, and if the corporations had to deal with the various state laws in the construction from state to state, it would have presented a major problem trying to negotiate state laws as the railroad crossed from one state into the other all the way to the Pacific coast. Now, yeah, that was a real problem. The solution to it was to get the federal government involved for and the railroads, I mean, we kind of glamour. We still have railroads today, but anyway, in the movies and books and stuff, the railroads are always glamorized and stuff like that, and not knowing the history or the implications and concessions that were given by the federal government to the railroads. Okay, you got a point?
Yeah, just hold on one second. All right, so you're saying the solution was to go to the federal government and get them involved, or this is what the article is saying.
Yeah. So we're back on record.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just had to take a break there and get a drink.
Okay.
Clear my throat up a little bit. Anyway, we had a significant problem with interstate commerce because at that point, the states were still exerting their rights,
Mm.
which was to the detriment of the railroad barons, because they wanted a clear shot.
Mm.
And the states were saying, no, if you come through our state, you're going to have to go by our state regulations. And so the states were trying to curb the corporate conglomerate of the railroad barons, and so they went to the federal government, for concessions.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the development that were consequent to that led to the development of the corporations and the deregulation of the corporations for the benefit of the federal government. So, of course, when we had the Civil War, that was, like I say, it didn't have so much to do with human rights or any of that kind of thing as it did to have to do with states' rights.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so at the conclusion of the Civil War, I mean, they had railroads before that, certainly. But after the Civil War and the demolition of states' rights,
Right.
then it left a much easier path, for the railroad barons and the corporations to do what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have some of that historical thing going on. I mean, if you go through your state and look at the railroad lands,
Mm-hmm.
they're not taxed. So anyway, there's still a lot of the history of that era that still are apparent even in our, even today. It's interesting history.
Yeah.
But the reason why we're going over this history is so that you'll understand the development of corporations as we have moved further and further towards fascism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can that problem be alleviated? I don't know. I mean, everybody just jumped up and down, clapped their hands for joy, when the Congress and Trump come out with this new tax bill that lowered the corporate rate down to 20%. Because everybody said, well, this is good to give us all jobs and everything. Well, maybe that did happen, but I don't know what the implications of that are going to be. And so all these bonuses and benefits and new jobs that were given out because of this reduction in the tax, what does that look like for the future?
Well, he was hoping it would stimulate the economy, the spending.
He was hoping, and apparently it did to a certain extent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to tell you flat out, the thing that's going to stimulate the economy is when we redeem these currencies and we put power of money back into the hands of people instead of corporations and government.
I agree.
That's why this currency redemption, has had a struggle. Like I say, it was our impression way back in the fall of 2015 that the new United States notes would be for use at that time. But it wasn't. Here we are 2.5 years later. 2.5 years. And okay, don't get. We talked about that last time. Maybe I shouldn't get off on that. Let's get back on the subject matter here today, so people can have a little bit more understanding about corporations instead of listen to me preach and get on my soapbox. Anyway, so a lot of this had to do, a lot of these changes and so forth had to do with the development of the railroads, which apparently stimulated commerce.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it connected the East Coast with the West Coast for commerce, mm-hmm. which was an important thing as far as a developing nation. So in that respect, it's probably a good thing. But the question is, could there have been better results without, what was done? So that's the question. So we'll investigate this, and you may have a different opinion about things than I do. But okay. Anyway, the first large change in corporate law came in the 1880s when corporations were given the rights of personhood.
Trading with the I'm sorry, that's the Citizens United.
We'll go over that.
Okay.
But again, a corporation is a limited liability entity. It's a fiction. And so the definition of the word person in our modern usage has to do with an artificial entity. And so what the comment here is that the first change in regards to how we deal with a person came in the 1880s. Now, certainly this has a lot to do with the 14th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyway, it goes on here and says a case dated in the first half of the 1920s required the government to obtain search warrants to obtain corporate files. A decision that no doubt saved more than one profit monger supplying arms in World War I and hindered the prosecution of corporations that traded with the Nazis during World War II. Mm-hmm. Regulation of corporations is not socialism. Okay, again, regulation of corporations is not socialism when done to promote the common good. As paper entities, corporations have no rights. Only people have rights.
Right.
So what the government did, they changed all the people into persons. They made corporations persons. And so now,
right,
instead of having rights, people generally operate on benefit privileges.
So, well, they took us and made us corporations, so we had no rights, and they made corporations persons, which had rights.
No, not rights. They have benefit privileges.
Okay, benefit privileges, but
yeah,
like
I keep hearing people, using certain words interchangeably, but they need to take a close look at how they're using words. Words have meaning.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Okay. It says it is the obligation of that society in creating a corporation to ensure that it works to the common good and welfare of the society and not just the benefit of a few moneyed interests. Now, we're going to go into the history of corporations here to show that, because in the earliest of times, the states highly regulated and controlled corporations. Highly. I mean, you'll see it here. Anyway, it goes into the history here. It talks about what gone on in England, some of that, royal charters and all that kind of thing. It talks about the East India Trading Company. It says one can hardly blame the delegates to the convention for believing that there was no need for proposals regulating corporations, since there were less than 400 corporations in 1787.
40 corporations, less than
40
yeah.
in 1787. That number rose to 334 by 1800. 13 years later. What happened? What happened that all of a sudden we have all these entities interested in corporations? 13 years. I mean, now all of a sudden you got, nearly, a 300 or 400% increase in corporations in only 13 years. What happened? Excuse me.
Right.
Says the first blow to increasing corporate power came in 1795 as the pace of incorporations continued to expand. There was a movement to grant general charters to alleviate the problems with hearings and petitions. North Carolina was the first state in 1795 to enact a general incorporation law, followed by Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, and so forth. However, some states required more than a simple majority for granting, renewing, or altering a corporate charter. In the 1840s, citizens in New York, Delaware, Michigan, and Florida required 2/3 vote of their state legislature to allow a corporation or to alter a corporation. 2/3 vote in the state legislatures in order to do that. So in essence, the states were very careful of allowing these corporations to do whatever they wanted to do. And it goes on, Wisconsin, 4 other states, every bank charter, because that's a corporation, every bank charter had to be first approved by the voters within the state, and then the charter was recommended to the legislatures. See? They're keeping the thumb on this. Nevertheless, even under a general incorporation law, states still treated the corporate charters as a privilege and restricted the activities of corporation to a great extent. The following comprises some of the limitations placed on corporations by various states. Okay, so the state governments were trying to prevent takeover of their state by corporations. So here are some of the limitations that some of the states imposed on corporations which were operating within their borders. Number one was limited duration. Charters were granted only for a period of 10 or 20 or 30 years, after which the corporation had to be liquidated and the proceeds distributed among the shareholders. No monopolies here, folks.
Yeah.
And then limited land holdings. Many states imposed limitations on the amount of land the corporation could own, such as the railroad. Most often, the amount of land was limited to that required for the factory or mill site. In other words, they couldn't go out and take their profits and speculate in land. Limited capital holdings. Once again, many states limited the amount of money or financial assets a corporation could possess. Yeah. Some states banned corporations from owning other corporations or even stocking them. Once a corporation exceeded the limit, it had to be either dissolved or split. See, they're keeping the thumb on this.
Right, exactly. At least then they did.
That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go into how they finally got around all that. Specific purpose charters. This was perhaps the most common of all restrictions in the early country. Corporations were chartered only for a specific purpose, such as building a canal or building a road. Once the stated purpose was completed, the corporation was dissolved. Now charters are issued that enable a corporation to engage in any kind of business. See? Okay. No limits on liability. As I mentioned, in our present time, all corporations are limited liability corporations, but it hasn't always been that way. So one of the restrictions that some of the states were trying to impose was that directors, managers, and shareholders were held to be fully liable for any debts or damages. Now, again, I've referred in the past to the rape of Appalachia by the coal companies.
Right.
This is exactly how they're doing it. They're coming in under limited liability. They're raping and taking their profits, going into bankruptcy and whistling down the road. Now, could that have happened back in these other times? The answer is no. So what caused it? And we'll go into that in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
In some cases, the lender or injured party was entitled to double or even triple the damages. Other states imposed extremely high interest rates until the debt was fully paid. And so these corporations simply couldn't, for instance, they couldn't go in to strip mine a mountain, walk away from it, with the profits because of the environmental impact and the impact to the people around them. Restrictive shareholder right. Now, look, folks, the reason I'm going over this is so that you'll understand what efforts have been made, and for good reason, to get a handle on this corporate problem. Now, all this stuff has gone away. What happened to cause that? We'll go into that. Restrictive shareholder rights. The internal governance of corporations was much more restrictive than it is today. Shareholders had more rights. In case of mergers, some states required a unanimous vote of shareholders. What's a credit union? A lot of people get involved in credit unions. What is that?
Well, people pull their
shareholders.
Money. Yeah, they're shareholders. They pull their money together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you as a shareholder ever have a vote in what the credit union does? No. Anyway, going along, restrictions on pricing. Some states maintain the right to set prices on corporate products. Wisconsin, for one, gave the state legislature the power to set prices on products after reviewing the corporation's expenses. Revocable charters. States maintain the right to revoke or change a charter at the will of its legislature. Almost all states adopted this clause after 1820. So they're not going to let these corporations run the state,
Mm-hmm.
which they would have done if these restrictions hadn't been put on them. What changed? Oh my goodness. Do we see any of these restrictions in our present time? No, not a single one of them.
Well, that has to do with the personhood issue, isn't it?
Exactly. We'll get into that.
Okay.
Anyway, they want to look at some court cases. Says before continuing to look at various state constitutions of the early 1800s, a brief review of a couple of early Supreme Court cases is needed. One of the cases led to most states including a clause allowing for the modification or annulment of any charters the state may grant. Perhaps one of the best Chief Justices of the Supreme Court of all time was John Marshall, and I think I'm a shirt tail relative of his. Anyway, John Marshall, appointed by John Adams in 1801. It was Marshall who shaped the Supreme Court into being a full third branch of government and strengthened the federal system. Anyway, these cases, I don't want to go over all of them. It's just a history of what was being done to prevent corporate takeover of America during those times. So he has reference here to these cases, but he talks about this one Dartmouth case. Says the Dartmouth case was the first case which tried to attach a property right to a corporate charter. Okay. So you know, as you look at the evolution of these court cases and stuff, then you start to see, you know, how, you know, a crack was made, and then the crack, you know, kept getting bigger and bigger. Right. That's what it amounts to.
Yep.
Marshall was well known for his opinions and choosing his words with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. However, Marshall's opinion granted no property rights to a corporation. Rather, in the Dartmouth case, he extended the Fletcher case and the principle of the sanctity of a written contract to include states as well as corporations, which the excerpt below shows. Now, again, during these times, what kind of money was being used? See what I mean?
Well, yeah, it was.
What happened in 1933?
Well, that's when we went to the fiat dollar.
Yeah, see?
Federal Reserve started, yeah.
So, yeah, limited liability currencies. So when you come out of full liability on the private side,
right,
and you go into limited liability on the public side, this opens the door for fascism. So we have these things in history. That's why, you know, in all these interviews and stuff we've done,
right,
I've tried to incorporate as much history as possible so that people will know where we came from. And then, you know, we have to make the decision. You know, do we want to continue in the direction we're going, or do we want to roll back? That's the question. So that's why I put so much history, you know, into a lot of our interviews and stuff.
Very hard once the horse is out of the barn, Winston.
Well, it is. Anyway, this is the words of Marshall. He says a corporation is an artificial being, invisible, intangible, and existing only in the contemplation of the law. It possesses only those properties which the charter of its creation confers upon it. The opinion of the court after mature deliberation is that this is a contract, the obligation of which cannot be impaired without violating the Constitution of the United States. This is how they viewed these things early on, and they tried to put things in place to prevent a corporation.
I'm laughing at the next line.
Well, that's a little side comment I had put into this article. My question is whether parties could do contract to criminal acts and retain the protection of the Constitution in regards to the obligation. It's just, okay, yeah, it's just
It's
something
funny.
cute.
It's funny, yeah.
Yeah. It's
I mean,
just a
I'm
side note.
sure it's something that someone's tried arguing, though, many
They
times.
may have. If you see little blurbs in this article in red, that's little side comments I put in there. Just contemplating, scratching my head, trying to
Yeah.
think about what if. But we have these things going on. Again, I started out with Murder Incorporated.
Hmm.
Uh, anyway, it talks a little bit more about Marshall and some of the things that he was contemplating. Uh, it says here Marshall clearly stated that the only rights a corporation has comes from its charter and not from the Constitution. A corporation has no constitutional rights, damn it. The only right it would have to do something would be based upon its charter. And who chartered it? The state. Now, if you recall, back in 2012, I've told this story about what we did with that big commercial lien against the Federal Reserve Bank.
That's right.
Because as private central banks,
Hmm.
they were due to recharter
Right. That's what you said.
in 2013. With that big lien in place, they couldn't recharter.
Mm-mm.
That's why we did that. And boy, did that start a hellstorm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're still mad at me for it.
Yep.
Too bad.
Retaliating.
Oh yeah, keep retaliating. I mean, they like to see me dead, but I guess God has something more for me to do here, so I'm still
Yep.
with it.
All right. We're happy about that, Winston.
Well, I don't know as much I'm happy about it, but
Yeah, I know.
no. But I give this as a for instance.
Hmm.
See, again, as a private central bank under charter, with that huge commercial lien in place, they could not recharter. And so the function of the Federal Reserve Bank then was taken up by the U.S. Treasury, which, to be perfectly honest, wasn't much better than the Federal Reserve Bank because they were all in bed together.
Right.
They're just sharing syphilis one with another. That's all I can say. Okay, little pun. Anyway, get along here. Says 1819, universal inclusion of states to contain language to amend and revoke charters in both state laws and state constitutions. Then it talks about, again, the states are trying to regulate the corporations. Excuse me. Can you hold that for just a minute?
Yep, not a problem. Just hold on a second, folks. Bear with us.
Okay, just had to get some cough drops here. Early in the morning, like I say,
Your volume? Your
my
volume
volume, I
needs to
haven't
go up.
changed.
Needs to go up.
I haven't changed it.
Yeah, hold on a second.
You want me to turn my?
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, we need to adjust our audio here. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. We had to adjust some of our controls here. Well, let's go on a little bit. In the 1870s, 7 state constitutions made bank shareholders doubly liable for any debts. Each stockholder of a corporation or joint stock association shall be individually and personally liable for each proportion of all its debts and liabilities contracted or incurred. Again, 501c3,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be out of your mind to involve your church in something like that. Anyway, during the time he was a stockholder, the amount of stock or shares owned by him varies to the whole of the subscribed capital stock or shares of the corporation or association. The directors or trustees of corporations and joint stock associations shall be jointly and severally liable to the creditors and stockholders for all monies embezzled or misappropriated by the officers of such corporation or joint stock association during the term of office of each director or trustee. Then I got my little side comment down here. Voter registration.
Mm.
Are you registered as a common stockholder of the corporation? If so, you're jointly and severally liable
Mm.
for embezzlement, like Obamacare. Hey, wake up and smell the roses, folks. This is serious stuff. And you know, when people wonder why are we in the shape we're in?
Yeah.
Well, I'm showing it to you right here.
Or wake up and smell the horse manure with the barn door open.
Yeah, I don't know.
A little country humor.
All right. Then it goes on a little bit further. It says the exercise of the right of eminent domain shall never be so abridged or construed as to prevent the legislature from taking the property and franchises of incorporated companies and subjecting them to land use, the same as the property of individuals in the exercise of the police power of the state, shall never be so abridged or construed as to permit corporations to conduct their business in such a manner as to infringe the rights of individuals or the general well-being of the state. So again, these provisions are being put in place to prevent corporations from basically taking over states. I mean, from time to time, people call me with questions about eminent domain. You know, the county or the city is coming in and condemning their property, trying to take it from them. Well, why is that?
Right.
Because you're a shareholder. You're a voter. You participate.
How do
So
can they rescind their registration?
well, of course.
Uh,
You know, why is it they spend so much money at election time trying to get everybody to go down and register to vote and even bring in illegal aliens to vote?
I know. And the dead, they woke the dead too.
They can wake the dead up.
They resurrected the dead to vote. That's
Now, a lot of people are going to point their finger at me and say, Winston, you're wrong about this voting, this registration, and all these kind of things. Am I? And when we get this new interim government in place, what will be the situation? See, if you go way back to the earliest of times under the Constitution, in order to be a voter, you had to be white, male, and the landholder under the original Constitution in order to be able to vote. Now you can vote if you're from Mars or the moon. You can simply come down and register and vote in an election.
Jeez.
So are there restrictions that should be re-implemented? Certainly not to as the original process was, to limit voters to only white males who own land. But certainly we should not have a registration system which simply creates a liability in you for the excesses and crimes of the corporation that you're signing into.
Right.
I'm not against voting, but what I am against is that when you do go and register, now all of a sudden you put yourself into a very precarious position.
Well, making us pick up the tab for the malfeasance of the politicians.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so these, these politicians can go out and raise the debt ceiling, do all kinds of stuff. The only thing they're doing is throwing the people into debt. Now, did the people vote for that? No. That's why, at one time we talked about, recall of elected officials. You can recall these people and get them out of office before their term runs out. But it is so corrupt that people have become convinced that criminal activity is the new morality. And without a study of history,
right,
people generally won't see it because they haven't been exposed to the other way. That's why I say, we have carryover concepts. Like, for instance, in the days of the Constitution in the 1700s and stuff, their definition of a voter was entirely different than our definition of a voter here in the 21st century. and without, you know, some level of historical study, people are convinced to act in a certain way that probably if they, you know, knew a little bit more, they wouldn't act that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, hey, you know, wake up, people. You know, hopefully, you know, with the institution of the interim government and NASARA,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we as people are going to be forced to consider, you know, the wrongs that we have been involved in.
Good. It's
We,
time for
we've
some introspection and reflection.
we've created serious national karma.
Yeah.
So again, like I say, we're trying to, you know, educate people a little bit. You know, this is not a PhD or anything like that, but we're at least trying to expose a few things that might cause people to a little bit of introspection and try to figure things out a little bit. Like I say, you know, anyway, going on here, like I say, I'm not sure I want to go through all these court cases and stuff because you know, we're running up for time,
Yep.
so forth. Anyway, it gives it. You know, I'll send you this. You put it on so people can read it. Go through all the different things, so they would have a good working knowledge, you know, of the history of what's evolved into.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this one quote from Lincoln himself says, "I see in the near future." Now, he's saying this back in the 1860s.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, "I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country.
Mm-hmm.
Corporations have been enthroned, and
Mm-hmm.
an era of corruption in high places will follow. And the money of this country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until all wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed."
We are so close.
Now, folks, for all those critics of all the comments that have been made about the redemption of these currencies,
Mm-hmm.
this is an effort to get the money back into the hands of the people. And, you know, and people keep saying, well, is this really going to happen? And I keep saying, it has to happen. It has to happen. This is a part of the program. This is a part of the plan. That's why I wrote that article on the two-tiered money system so that people would understand this.
Right.
The people have to stop competing with the governments and the corporations and the banks, all that kind of thing, for the existing money.
Right.
We're fixing to flood the country and the planet with money into the hands of people. And however they use it, I don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the ones I've talked to have all pledged these resources for humanitarian purposes. You know, we need to get the government out of humanitarian. They don't belong there.
Right.
Now, I've given the story of Davy Crockett. I mean, everybody remembers old Davy Crockett, you know. Walt Disney put him on. Well, old Davy, he had run for Congress in Tennessee. He made it to Congress, and he was up for re-election, which, by the way, he didn't get, so he went to Texas. But anyway, Davy was out electioneering there in his home state, and he come upon this one farmer and that, you know, told him, you know, he was up for re-election, and, you know, and he was trying to solicit his vote. The guy said, "I'm not going to vote for you."
Mm.
Davy, an honest man, said, "Well, why wouldn't you vote for me?" The guy told him, because what had happened, I think it was some kind of military officer or something like that who had given good and faithful service to the country. He had died. and the Congress had voted a pension to his wife. And this farmer in Tennessee found that out. When old Davy come around with electioneering, he said, "I'm not going to vote for you." He said, "I didn't send you up to Congress to give my tax money to some widow over here." He said, "That's not what I sent you for." You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, to Davy's credit, once this guy told him this, Davy went back and tried to oppose that bill, but Davy went and raised a fund for this lady, for this widow. And that's the way it should be done. Government needs to get their hands out of humanitarian or out of charity or any other thing like that. Oh, Davy knew that, or he found it out.
Right.
But that's exactly what Lincoln's talking about here. He said, and the republic will be destroyed if all the wealth is aggregated in the hands of a few. And how would that happen? Through corporations.
Well, this is exactly what the corporate state is, exactly what Lincoln was foreseeing here, what he feared would eventually, come to fruition. And it's what, and it has come to fruition, the corporate state. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this article goes on. We're not going to have a whole lot of time to go with this whole article. It's a very good article. Like I say, some of it I put in. I kind of conglomerated it from a lot of different sources and whatnot. Anyway, it goes through the court cases. Again, it has to do with the change in the definitions of words more than anything else. It says here, 1886, apparently, this period of time, it says the court does not wish to hear argument on the question whether the provisions in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which forbids a state to deny any person the equal protection of the laws, applies to these corporations. We're all of the opinion that it does. And so again, you're starting to see the evolution of the words and the way things are being used, and the pressure that's being put onto the government by the corporations to change everything to their benefit. So this history here goes through a lot of that, through the evolution. It says it should be clear that the rich elite as a class didn't begin to emerge until after the Civil War, which paralleled with the court's pro-business rulings that reached a climax with the robber barons of the 1880s. By the end of the 1880s, corporations were granted the rights of personhood by the Weight Court. In effect, the judicial system conferred citizenship on corporations without any of the obligations and responsibilities that go with individual citizenship. It leaves us in the precarious position of capital money having more rights than the owner of the capital.
Exactly.
Go back to what Anne, that last interview you did with Ayn Rand, some of her comments about making money and who has the right to use of that money. See? And so people tend to, get a perverted view of how he's saying. So this article here has a lot of the evolution in history about how all those different things happened. And it goes a little bit more. In 1996, 51 of the world's largest economies were corporations, with General Motors itself larger than Denmark. And Walmart, the 12th corporation, larger than 161 countries. It says the top 200 corporations in the world have sales equivalent to 28.3% of the world's gross national product. The combined sales of these top 200 corporations are larger than all but the world's 9 largest countries. These top 200 corporations employ 18.8 million people, or less than 1/3 of 1%. You see how the things are so completely out of balance.
Truly.
Yeah. Now that goes into domestically, the top 1% of Americans own 40% of all U.S. assets. Corporate share of income taxes has fallen from roughly 40% in the 40s to less than 15% today.
Mm.
And on and on and on it goes. Like I say, people would want to take this article and study. It goes
Sure.
into the some of the things. You remember Michael Milken and all that
Mm-hmm.
trash stock, how they use that to manipulate. Then I think I don't. Yeah, then it goes into the situation with Neil Bush
Mm-hmm.
and the Silverado savings and loan. I think some of us remember all that. What went on with that? Junk bond fiasco. Blah blah blah. Anyway, it's a good.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes into deregulation and what happened because of that. Because again, it uses the airline industry as an example. And again, what are they? Corporations.
Right. Everything is a corporation. That was
And
the,
so when
yeah.
they started to deregulate them, they went wild. Went wild.
But he's almost like an oxymoron because if they're going to if we're going to become corporations, all capital letters, then we should have the same rights as corporations do, which is personhood, which is kind of an oxymoron because we are persons. So we were to
Well,
begin with, and it was taken
no,
by
our
definition,
straw
we should
our
be
straw
person.
man is the person, but you're being taxed on the basis of being a shareholder in the United States Incorporated, which presently is gone. So we're presently in an evolution
Mm-hmm.
backwards, from the direction we were going. Anyway, the article goes into regulations, what happened with Reagan, Supreme Court, blah blah blah. I was going to make one short comment. I didn't get into.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I skipped over it. No, the antitrust.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that post
Everybody thought
before
that was really a good thing. It only contributed to the problem.
that. Mm, really?
Go read the article and use the logic that they're trying to talk about there. Anyway, it's pretty much, like I say, we're kind of running out of time, so I don't want to. The people can read this,
Mm-hmm.
and then I put my little 2 cents in worth at the end of it. As remedies. What have we been doing as solutions in commerce to educate people in regards to some of these problems? And I recommend, some of the things that we have worked on to as remedies and so forth. And then certainly our last production, which is reclaiming your status and assets, will go a long way
Mm-hmm.
for people to reclaim
Mm-hmm.
their rightful position as people, because it shows you how you can own your own body instead of the state having your body. Now, recently also, I did write another article on marriage,
Mm-hmm.
which we posted, which will come out today on our uh, mailing list on Winston's watch. And I also sent you a copy of that on
That'll be
email.
right. That'll be posted on our blog, which will then be reposted on our Facebook page and Twitter as well. So
Great, yeah. I put a lot of thought into that particular article because I'm constantly being asked about some of those dynamics and so forth.
mm-hmm.
And so I kind of summarized the problem
Mm-hmm.
and then, tried to indicate, what solutions, could result if people just, take a little bit of effort to do some of those things. So again, like I say, we're kind of out of time,
Mm-hmm.
but I just wanted to, bring those things to people's attention, so they can make definitive decisions and actions in their own life to improve things.
Right.
If you want to stay a sheeple, if you still want to just be a slave to society and so forth, just keep going the way you're going. But if you don't want to be,
Mm-hmm.
start to do a little bit of study. I've tried to provide, some information, and you can find much, much more information about these very subjects we talk about from different authors and different things like that most of whom are a heck of a lot smarter than me,
Mm.
but they're not on the internet, promoting these things, and I am. And so that's what the benefit of Goldfish reports has been. That's what the benefit of solutions in commerce has been. And like I say, many others. I'm not the only guy out there, or the only man or woman out there promoting these things and trying to give this knowledge and information to people. I just happen to be the one you're listening to today. That's all.
Winston, you're preserving this for, our other generations, like the snowflakes who don't have this history in their schools because it's been removed.
Yeah.
And their parents don't know it themselves. My parents didn't. So, it's very important that our viewers share this with your family members so that and even your summer vacations coming up, let your grandkids watch a few of these reports so they get with them, so you can put it in context, but so that you can preserve this information, because it has been systematically removed and cleansed, much of it from the internet, and completely out of our schools. So there's the fascism, as Winston was talking about, is alive and well, and there's great control over the kind of information we have access to. And we know that because our YouTube channel was deleted, because this is the fascist state we live in. We're not, it's censorship. In fact, the report titled "Weakened Censorship" was censored. I cannot even upload that to YouTube, to our new channel.
Yeah.
I cannot even upload it. I try to. I get about 80% of the way, and then it just says, you can't upload this video. And there's two, report 204 and 206. It's not even possible for me to upload them on YouTube, but they are all on our BitChute channel, everything.
Yep.
So all of our reports, and I will be getting them in our archives on the BitChute too. Right now, I started the archives on the Goldfish report on YouTube, and uh, it's a work in progress. It takes a lot of gigabytes to upload all of this stuff, and that's very costly. So, folks, it would be really helpful if you go to our Patreon site and become a patron at the Goldfish Report, and also you can go to our main webpage at www.thegoldfishreport.com, and you'll find all of the links to all of our channels and all of our media where you can find our reports. And recall, please, that the POTUS reports are only available through the links on our website. It just has to be that way. But they are available. And of course, they're all available on, I'm sorry, in terms of YouTube, but they're all available on BitChute. So definitely join BitChute or subscribe, or go to BitChute and subscribe there, because then you'll be able to get all of our new reports. And it's only because a lot of people haven't changed from, YouTube, unquestionably has a very user-friendly platform. I agree. Which is why it was easy to use them. But BitChute, because of the extreme censorship that they are engaging in, many people have left YouTube and gone to BitChute and other platforms. So we have to uh, all make adjustments in order to get the information that we're looking for. So Winston, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. It was great to see you. Thank you for bringing this information, because it does help to explain how we got into this mess, as you said. And I will have this article, as a link. If you send that to me, I'll post that with the interview.
Yeah. I'll send these articles so you can have them, for people to study. Like I say, we just have a short time to review some of these things, but a lot of these things you could spend hours and hours and hours going over, because the information, it takes a little while for it to sink in. Yeah, you're on mute again.
Sorry about that. No, I agree, and it's very helpful to, like I said, the archives are worth restoring, and they're worth looking at, because I'm just going to pull up the webpage for viewers. Because all the information, all of our reports are there, and you can always go back and do research on any of these topics We have quite a few, and I'm going to just screen share really quick before we finish our webpage. I'm sorry, our website. And the website has, you can see a link here for POTUS report links. Okay, so when I put my mouse over it, it goes to gray. You can see our archive channel is here, a link directly to our archive channel. You can also see our Patreon link right here. You can see our Twitter page right here, which we have all of our, and this is updated too. So there's everything that's new on our, that we've tweeted is on here. You can also go to our Facebook page here. And here's the links to all of the resources that we have. And just be patient with us. It's not all updated. Most of it is. Our blog is not updated yet. That's the last thing that we have to update. And it's very time consuming. And like I said, it takes a lot of gigabytes to get all these videos restored and uploaded. So we will get it done in time.
Yeah,
And
let me also say that, on our website, WSIC or WSSIC.com, we also have an interview section. Now, when all the Goldfish reports were dumped, then those are not available. But I have, I don't know, 20 or 30 or more interviews that I've done over the years. And again, those are free to the public. Most of those, cover certain and various subjects. And some of those subjects, are listed in the, description and stuff. But we also have, subjects about solutions in commerce, things that people would want to know about it, on our website. Just that the Goldfish things got knocked down, but anyway, they'll come back up.
yeah, well,
Anyway.
right, and I have the link to the archive page. Then your office can go into and replace those old URLs. But I would definitely recommend replacing them with the BitChute URL
Yeah,
because right
yeah.
now it's more it's more reliable. And we also know that Facebook is also still this testimony on Capitol Hill did nothing to well, there's no regulations yet, so
Hmm.
that's the direction they were talking about, but we haven't seen any bills with proposed regulation because the deep state's still using this information to support. As you said in one of your, I want to end the video, but one of the points of fascism was the, of course, we know the controlled mass media, but the whole issue that we have with the government creating companies to usurp like Facebook and all of basically the Silicon Valley technology companies. It's all subsidized by government, and they're doing that to get around the requirements for warrants. And I'm sorry, not just warrants, but that they can't spy on us. So it would be a violation of our amendments for unreasonable search and seizure, whatever. So okay, so we just know that this is what's happening, folks. We appreciate you being with us. We hope you have a great weekend. Hang in there. There's a lot going on. We're going to be back next week with another episode of Country Roads, and of course on Monday with the POTUS report. So folks, thanks for viewing. Thanks Winston for being here, and this concludes
Okay.
this edition of the Goldfish Report.